Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is?
Memorable villains are a very important part of video games and pretty much any piece of media out there. In some cases, like Far Cry 4's Vaz, a villain could even become what a game is most known and praised for. Or a game like Portal 2 just wouldn't be the same without GLaDOS constantly insulting the player. When it comes to the Armored Core series, with its many different games and generations, we have seen a large and varied cast of villains. For example, the Legendary Nineball of Generation 1, Klein of Generation 2, or the Controller in Generation 3. Not to mention the new and amazing cast of Armored Core 6 with its many different antagonists. Yeah, they're all a bit similar, aren't they? If you came here for a detailed and nuanced breakdown of the villains in the Armored Core franchise, I'm sorry to tell you, but you've stumbled upon the wrong video. There are other channels that have done some amazing breakdowns of these things, and I might want to do something like that in the future. But for now, I'd like you to listen to some of my ramblings about Armored Core villains. As I recently started playing the AC games for the very first time in preparation for the release of Armored Core 6, which is also what kind of started my channel, I was able to notice a very clear pattern, or should I say template for the villains. It's not like they are written poorly or boring, it's just fairly simple to grasp what exactly is going on, once you manage to identify the different types of antagonists the game seems to have. And through my experience with the games, I was actually able to accurately predict the final fight of Armored Core 6 in one of my very first streams on the game. To further elaborate on these types of antagonists I'm talking about, I should quickly mention that I have not played the 5th gen of Armored Core games. However, I have played the first Armored Core game, Master of Arena, Armored Core 2, 3, Last Raven, 4, 6, and I am currently playing through 4 Answer. So I think that I have seen most of what these games have to offer, at least in terms of villains. For the first and most prevalent type, we have the Rogue AI, first introduced in the form of Nineball, Generation 1's main baddie. And yes, I know that Nineball isn't the AI, it's the AC piloted by an AI called Hustler 1 or H-1, but I will just refer to it as Nineball. Throughout the later games, you will notice Nineball pop back in once in a while, but it also continues its legacy far into the later generations. The main villain for Armored Core 3, for example, is called the Controller, which is also just a super advanced AI computer that just kinda goes crazy at some point. But to be fair, Nineball did at least have some motivations behind its actions, while the Controller just kinda did things. And then we also have AC6's All Mind, but we'll get to that one a little bit later. Another type of villain present in the series is a Mercenary gone rogue. FromSoft must have been feeling daring that day. I would consider Armored Core 2's Klein, Armored Core 4's Joshua O'Brien, and various characters from AC6 to be a part of this category. These antagonists actually have a bit more going on for them, as they are humans, well, for the most part, and they usually have some interesting backstories and motivations to justify their actions. In the case of Klein, he is actually supposed to be the player's character from a previous game, Master of Arena, which has a lot of really interesting implications when it comes to the cybernetic enhancements people go through in the Armored Core universe, as he is supposed to be about 90 years old at the beginning of AC2. It's okay, Grandpa, you can go back to bed, we're not gonna overthrow the government or use a moon to crash into Mars, you know? maybe it's time to take your pills. And maybe while you're at it, you can go hit that subscribe button. Another interesting aspect are his motivations, since he is technically me, and I had my own motivations, but he is also him, and then he has his motivations in the game. You know, it starts to get a little complicated, but also pretty interesting. I think you're starting to see why this type of villain might be a bit more complex than the Rogue AI type, which is why I'm really happy that FromSoft decided to go with mostly human characters in AC6. Because out of all of the different games I've played in the series, the cast of Armored Core 6 is definitely the most memorable one. From everyone's favorite Rusty to Handler Walter, the whole Red Gun Squad, or Cinder Carla, there's just so much variety that I can't help but be drawn into the world way more than in any of the other titles. Which brings me to a very interesting realization I had while I was making this video. If you really think about it, there isn't that much to most of the villains in Armored Core. In true From Software fashion, you have very little interaction with other people or things, as they really excel at making dying worlds. The connections you usually make are based on experiences, rather than actually getting to know the characters through their dialogue, writing, or main storyline. But then it kinda clicked for me. When I was starting out with my Armored Core journey earlier this year, I knew nothing about the series. And while streaming the very first AC game generation, people in chat would keep chuckling and be all secretive about certain things right up until the end. So as to not spoil anything for me, no one let anything slip. Everyone knew what was going on. And then, BAM! Nineball Seraph. The last mission of Master of Arena held answers to many questions I had up till that point, and capped everything off with one of the most infamous bosses in Armored Core history. Why is this boss so infamous? Well, sure, it's difficult, but that's not all. As I was saying, FromSoft is very good at making memorable gaming experiences, simply through gameplay, even back in the 90s. And the community that formed around these games was filled with people that all had their own story to tell because of the strong gameplay focus, which encouraged diversity in the approach to beating Nineball Seraph. This is something that people talk about and will keep talking about for a very long time, as this wasn't just a scripted movie sequence you would watch with everyone just kinda having the same experience. And I could keep talking about this for a while, but what I really wanted to get across here is that the Armored Core community, the players themselves, are an asset to enhancing the experience of the game substantially, especially the villains of the series. Without my chat quietly hyping up the big villains of the earlier games and telling me about the lore and, the experiences they've had with them, many of the big bad guys would have just been alright. But the community managed to elevate them in a way you rarely see in any other game franchise. One of the other ones being Dark Souls, which is why I think that a gameplay-first approach is almost always the right way to go about making a game, but that might be a topic for another video. So now that we're done with that, why don't we talk about why Armored Core 6 has the most amount of supplementary artwork material, out of all the games, if you catch my drift? I have already mentioned that AC6 has a great and memorable roster of characters. But to keep it consistent with the theme of this video, let's just talk about some of the ones that I would consider to be antagonists. And I'm fully aware that there might be some hot takes in here. First up, we have Iguazu. This is one most people probably won't argue with, as he is pretty much only there to annoy us and be a little dickhead. The next character I want to talk about is Rusty. And calling him an antagonist is probably going to put me on a hit list by the Thrusty Lovers for Life fan club. His role in the game is fairly complex, and I won't fully go into the details here, but to me, he's undoubtedly someone who's supposed to take the role as a villain. All the while, he is also a friend, who eventually becomes a rival, pushing us to go even further and forcing us to make tough decisions. And it is very clear to me why he is the community's favorite. He is just a really intriguing character and he deserves his own video, so he'll probably get one eventually. Air and our handler, Walter, are both kind of in the same boat. These are characters which are clearly here to guide us, to help us and be companions. Throughout the game you will learn more and more about them and maybe even start to question some of their motives, just as they might start to question yours. And depending on the path you choose, even they might have to turn against you, to stay true to whatever it is they are fighting for. These decisions lie at the very heart of Armored Core 6 and greatly influence the happenings of the game, to eventually lead you to one of 3 vastly different endings. Although you are locked out of the third and last ending right up until your third playthrough, in which you eventually have to face off against what I would consider the true villain of Armored Core 6. And also the villain I correctly predicted very early on based on my knowledge of villains from the previous games. Allmind is an entity very similar to Hustler 1, the AI piloting Nineball in Gen 1. However, All Mind is very deeply woven into the storyline, as it is always present but only reveals its plans in the final playthrough. All Mind is fairly interesting for being just yet another rogue AI, but it mostly serves as the final bad guy to point at in order to not have a falling out with your other friends you've made along the way. And I know that there are still way more characters I really should mention here, but I wanted to keep this video a bit shorter, and I promise you that I still have many different plans for upcoming videos, which should cover all of this. But for now, if you'll excuse me, I have to look up some more Air and All Mind fan art. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you've enjoyed the video. I also hope that you've had a great Christmas and holidays. I originally planned to put this video out before Christmas, but a huge shout out to my channel members as per usual. I've properly started doing this YouTube thing about 6 months ago, I guess, and many of you have been here for a while, so truly, thank you for supporting me all this time. It really means a lot to me. Expect at least one more video before the end of the year where I detail some of the things that will be happening on the channel. But until then, thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.